Hey y'all, Coach in the Fight here, talking about potential watch dates. Now, a lot of you guys are really interested in watch dates. And you guys pay really close attention when, people talk about potential dates for the rapture or potential dates for the Great Awakening or some of these other events that is supposed to take place in our eschatology. And normally, I usually only talk about these dates, around the important days according to the Bible, around feast days and stuff like that. Frankly, because, if these events are not going to fall on a feast day, then there's really no need to, try to pick a day any day. They could be any day of the year, and we might as well stay on watch 365 or 364 days of the year. But there's a lot of people, myself included, that believe many of these events, especially the spiritual events, will occur on the feast days. So here we are, just having finished the spring holy or the fall holy days, talking about Rosh Hashanah, talking about the Day of Atonement and the week-long Feast of Tabernacles. And the only real significant feast days coming up are Hanukkah, maybe Purim, before we get around to the spring feasts, which would be Passover and unleavened bread. Well, I believe a lot of people during this time are afraid that they are going to not get so many views on their channel. And so they are trying to come up with other feast days that can somehow fall between where we're at now and Hanukkah, which, like we said, is the most significant days coming up on our calendar. Which is fine. If they're picking legitimate days, we're going to talk about one of those days here that you guys may not have ever considered, probably never even heard of. We're going to talk about that date here. But the problem is that some channels are going as far as to try to change the sacred calendar, try to change the month that we're in. They're trying to say that we are actually just now beginning at the 7th month instead of properly saying that we are in the 8th month. And what they're doing to do this is they're using the barley harvest. Somebody got the bright idea that the sacred year falls around the barley harvest. I've done a video on this in the past where I went in and researched where they're getting this information from, and it's completely in error. The barley harvest is never where we're supposed to get our year calculation from. If you go down through, like I'm doing here, and you search the scripture, the Bible, for barley harvest, you'll see that there's only 5 times in the whole scripture is the word barley harvest used in the same verse, and never is it used to determine time. I heard one channel says that it was Jewish law to use the barley harvest to, determine the year. That's not true, guys. I believe that individual who made that statement so boldly in his video knew that none of you guys would actually go in and actually try to look that information up for yourself. This is where they're actually getting that idea from, is over in the book of Exodus and chapter 9, when it's talking about the plagues that came down on Egypt. And in the verse here, verse 31, it says, "And the flax and the barley were smitten, for the barley was in the ear and the flax was boiled." So they're saying, okay, this was the status of the barley, so this is how they are or were supposed to determine the year. I mean, seriously, if you look through all of the scripture and try to understand these guys who are saying that the year depends somehow on the barley harvest, this is what you end up. You end up in Exodus chapter 9 and verse 31. There is no such thing as Jewish law that talked about the barley harvest in any other scripture being used to calculate the year. That's actually not how it was supposed to be done at all. And these guys are kind of weird. Some of them are talking about how the barley was swishy back there in March of 2020. Apparently they got some rain over there in that part of the world or whatever. And so they were saying that it was too hard to find barley because it was squishy. He used the word squishy. And so somehow the sacred calendar, our God's calendar, was moved a month later to adjust for this squishy barley. Well, that's not the case, guys. That's silly. I mean, you think about it. The two most important years are the Sabbath year and the Jubilee year. You have the Sabbath year in year 49, followed by the Jubilee year in year 50. Well, the two unique things about those years is you're not allowed to plant anything. The land gets a rest in those 2 years back to back. And so there is no barley. And so you think about it, the two most important years in the biblical cycle, you wouldn't have a barley harvest whatsoever. So, were those guys completely without time in the 2 years where time was of the essence? We're talking about the Jubilee year and the sabbatical year. No, guys, they're just making this stuff up. So in this video, I'm going to show you really quickly over in the book of Enoch how it is that how it is that we do calculate the year. Not supposed to. This is how it's actually calculated. Now, for those of you guys who are not familiar with the book of Enoch, Enoch was one of the two guys that were translated. He actually, his mission here on the earth was to write 366 books for us to use to know how the cycle of the luminaries work. He's the one who taught us about fallen angels. He's taught us about a lot of things in those books. And one of the things he taught us was the luminaries. You see up here in chapter 71 of this particular translation, how you have the book of the luminaries. He talks about the sun. He talks about the star. He talks about the year. He talks about the month. He breaks down how it is that we are supposed to determine our year. Now, I don't want to go verse by verse. We've done this before in many classes, talking about, when the year starts. So I'm just going to jump to the main two verses to show you how it is that the sacred year is determined according to Enoch, according to the authority, not according to Barley, not according to, wishful thinking. A lot of those guys, they just want the yearly cycle to match up with what they think. A lot of them, they came in their videos and they say that God told them that the rapture would happen during the Feast of, Atonement or during the Feast of Rosh Hashanah, and then, when Rosh Hashanah came and left, then they're kind of stuck. Did God really tell you that? And instead of them saying, I was wrong, I didn't hear from God, it must not have been the God who told me that, the rapture would happen during Rosh Hashanah, they tried to move the whole year around and say that, it wasn't them that got it wrong, it was the entire calendar that is actually wrong. And like I said, those guys, they don't teach a lot of scripture over there. They're not really scriptural based channels, and so they know their thousands and 10,000s of subscribers are never going to pick up the scripture and try to understand it for themselves. They're actually just going to go, with what that individual says. But anyway, we're coming over here and we're looking at Enoch chapter 71, and we're going to start at verse 42. I don't really consider myself any smarter than those guys, and it's just that, we have the scripture here put here for us to go by. And I think the only real advantage I have over those guys when it all boils down to it is that, I put faith in the scripture over anything, over my own ideas, over any other man's ideas, or, Wikipedia, or, ain't nobody gonna be able to tell me anything that, is in contradiction to the scripture, and I'm going to entertain their ideas. They're pretty much wasting their time. And that goes for a lot of people too, especially the billions of people around the world who use the information from Enoch to determine the year. But let's look at verse 42. It says, "And that period, the night becomes shortened in its 9 parts, and the night is equal with the day. The year is precisely 364 days." Okay, so now this is talking about the end of the year. This is in the chapter of the book of the luminaries that tells us how the year works. It breaks down the year month by month. Each month, you can see there on your screen, each month is broken down with the number of days in it. It even talks about how much light is given in each day. And that's what it's talking about down here in this verse right here, which is at the end of the year. It's saying that the day, the number of hours in the day will equal the number of hours in the night. This is what we call the equinox. This is what it's talking about here is actually the spring equinox. So what Enoch is telling us here, and like I said, most of the people use this around the world. It's very few people who actually get into this barley harvest idea, but the sacred year is actually determined by the spring equinox. I say it again, the sacred year begins. It's talking about how it ends here, but of course the end is a new beginning. The sacred year begins and ends with the spring equinox only. So you notice that the barley is not considered. Nothing is considered as far as growing anything. It wouldn't make sense, like we said, when you have a entire 2 years, 24 months where nobody's allowed to plant barley at all. That don't make sense. But we see here that the year actually starts and ends with the spring equinox. Now I'm coming back up here to the beginning. That was the end of the cycle. But at the beginning of the cycle, the beginning when he starts to tell us about the beginning of the year, that's up here in verse 13 of chapter 71 of this translation. Again, in other translations, it may fall in a different chapter and such, but it's going to say the exact same thing. Verse 13 says, during that period, the day is lengthened from the day, and the night curtailed from the night for 30 days, and then the day is longer by 2 parts than the night. So we see in here, this is the first month. This is the first month that he's talking about, the first month of the sacred year. What he's telling us is that in that month, the day starts to become longer than the night. That's how we know that he's talking about the spring equinox, because in the vernal equinox, which occurs 6 months later, the day is actually becoming shorter. We just had a vernal equinox somewhere, sometime here, in the recent past. I don't pay attention to it because it don't really mean anything as far as the sacred calendar is concerned. But when you put together verse 13 with verse 14, verse 42 is saying that the year changes at the time in which the day and the night are equal, which, like we said, that's 2 times in a year. There's 2 times in a year when the day and the night are equal. And then up here at the beginning of the year, he tells us that the first month starts when the day is getting longer than the night. Okay, so that points exactly to the spring equinox. That's how we know when the sacred year is supposed to occur, and we start counting from there. Like you said, there's 364 days in a year. I believe the reckoning in that has something to do with maybe the day of the spring equinox is not really counted or something like that. But the important thing to understand is that you start with the spring equinox, you start counting 364 days, and then you start looking for the spring equinox again in order to start the year. It's just that simple. You think of that the same way you do the calendar. Most calendar months, according to Enoch, has 29 days in it. Some months have 30 days, talking about the lunar cycle from one new moon to the next. Well, what you do every single month is you go around 29 days, and then on that 29th day, you start looking for a new moon. Sometimes it falls on the 29th day. Sometimes it falls on the 30th day. But you go to complete 29-day cycle, and then you start looking for the new moon. Well, that's the way the 364-day calendar works too. You start, right after the spring equinox, go 364 days, and then you start looking for the next or the new spring equinox, and then you start your new year right after that. So we see in 2020 that the spring equinox was in March the 20th. It always falls on March the 20th according to the Gregorian calendar, except in leap years. So that's talking about the year. That's how we determine the year. So then you say, well, okay, when does the month start? That's when the year starts, when is actually the first day of the month. So let's come in here and let's look at a calendar provided by timeanddate.com, looking in March of the year 2020. We come down and we look at March the 20th, which fell on a Friday, and then you start from there and you start looking for the new moon. You see that the new moon fell on March the 26th. That's when the beginning of the month starts. This could be a little confusing for some people. That's why I say it slowly. The year starts with the spring equinox, and the month starts with the new moon. So you put those two together, and the first day of the year of 2020 was on March the 26th. Now, this is some important stuff. These holy days are extremely important. For some people, it's just about rapture watch dates or whatever. But for those of us who are written in the book of life, there are certain things that we have to do on these certain days. We're not just, packing our spiritual bags and ready to go into the spirit world. There are certain things that we are commanded to do on these certain days, according to Leviticus 23. These are very, very serious days, but we're going to get into that a little more here in a second. What I'm showing you down here at the end of this calendar is, notice how it says that on March the 31st, you have the day Nisan the 6th. So at the end of the month, March is on the 6th day of the first month. So let's look in April of 2020, the very next month. You see that April the 1st is Nisan 7, right? Like I said, I don't want to confuse anybody. So you see that the months, they overlap, but they don't correspond to one another so perfectly. So the first day of April was actually the 7th day of the first sacred month, and we know that that's important because when we come around and we look at the 15th day, or let's see, when we come around and we look at the 15th day of Nisan, we see it falls on April the 9th. And you notice that it's in red letters there. It's because when you're looking down here, you see that it's saying that the 9th is the first day of Passover. Passover falls on the 15th day of the month. It's really the name unleavened bread, but we'll cover that in another class. Passover, or unleavened bread, falls on the 15th day of Nisan. That's the first month celebration, and it fell in April. So we can use that information to count these months together. Now, I do have to point out how you see there it says that the new moon fell on March the 24th. That's because man's calendar, just like the calendar on your wall, uses the 0% moon, whereas the sacred month uses the first sighting of the moon. So on March the 24th, there would have been a 0% moon, or no moon up there for you to see at all. But the priests and the Levites would have had to wait it until they actually saw the new moon appear in the sky. And that's when they would have announced the new month had started. That's why, according to the sacred calendar, it says that the first day was on the 26th instead of the 24th. But I'm sure we can understand that we can use this information to count the months. Okay, so you have there on March the 26th, we'll just say 24th, just for the keep things a little bit more simple. You have the beginning of the first month, the beginning of the year, and the beginning of the first month. We coming down and we see that we have another new moon that fell on the 23rd. So that would be month 2 of April. The second month would have started on the 23rd of April. The third month would start on the 22nd of May. The fourth on the 21st of June. The fifth on the 20th of July. That's about the time when they're getting ready to start Tu B'Av and the 10th of Av. The 6th month started on August the 19th. And the 7th month started on the 17th of September. And we are here on the 21st of October, we know that because the 8th month started on the 16th of October, we are now in the first week of the 8th month. We're not in the 7th month. Those, people that are telling us that, we should be considered, thinking about doing Atonement Day and doing, tabernacles here coming up, they're in error. Some of them are actually intentionally in error. Most of them just don't know what they're talking about. But some of them understand that if we are to celebrate the sacred days like tabernacles on an unclean day like Halloween, then we're going to get in trouble. We're not supposed to do that. That's a serious error to, take the Lord's sacred days and move them at will. And so, like I said, most people aren't doing that intentionally. Most people just don't know that, talking about squishy barley and all of that, and they don't really understand, how Enoch described the year for us and how the year works. So they're just, basing their thoughts off of, error or whatever. But, we live in a wicked world, and there's some people who are doing this stuff intentionally, and they're intentionally trying to make us be out there worshiping the Feast of Tabernacles on Halloween in the year 2020 or whatever. But anyway, we can see the clues left for us, because that OCT in October actually means 8, just like that NOV in November means 9, that DEC in December means 10. That's just like that SEPT in September means 7. That's usually the start of the 7th month. October, we're in the 8th month, and the 8th month actually started. The 0% moon was on the 16th, but if you wanted to do a sighting of the new moon, which we did in our family and plenty of people did, around the world, you saw that on the evening of Saturday, September the 17th, is when you got the first sighting of the moon, making Sunday, the 18th of October, the first day of the 8th month, not the 7th month. We are not in the 7th month. We are in the 8th month. This is really important, guys, for us to stay in the correct month, because we have Hanukkah coming up in the 9th month. You see that it starts on the 25th day of the 9th month. So if we don't know what month we're in, we're moving months around, shuffling around as we see fit, then we're going to miss the events, especially those spiritual events that will take place during Hanukkah of the year 2020. You'll have people who will be, sometime around in January, still looking for the 9th month celebrations that occur in they're going to occur usually in December. But let's show you that. So you're coming over and you're looking at the calendar again. October the 16th, 17th, 18th, depending on how you count it, started the beginning of the 8th month, and then you'll see that the 9th month will actually start on November the 15th. All right, so let's show you how this works. We'll come over looking back at this calendar, timeanddate.com. We're looking in November of 2020. And when we come down and we look, we see that the first day of Kislev, the first day of the 9th month, is actually on the 17th of November. And so then you start the cycle of the 9th month, starting at November the 17th, and then you'll count your way around until you get to the 25th day. So here we are in December of the year 2020, and we're looking at Kislev, and we're going around until we get to Kislev 25. Kislev 25, we just saw over there in the book of Maccabees, is the beginning of the 8-day celebration of Hanukkah. It falls on December the 11th. And we come down here and we look down here, and that is exactly what we see as far as the holiday observances. It says on the 11th of December starts Hanukkah day 1. Okay, so that was timeanddate.com. So for secondary confirmation, we can come over here and we look at Google, And it'll say the same thing if you have a calendar that gives the Jewish holidays. You'll see that Hanukkah starts on the evening of December the 11th. Notice it says it on the evening, making the first day of Hanukkah, the first day of light of Hanukkah on December the 11th. Starts on the evening of December the 10th, and it ends on the evening of December the 11th. That's the first day. And that week-long celebration, or that 8-day celebration, goes all the way to Friday, December the 18th. That's why it's important to get these days right. We can't just play around, just making up stuff, squishy barley or whatever, and change the year around to fit what it is that we're thinking. There's people who these days mean something. It's not just, sitting around waiting to be, warped off the planet or whatever. There's responsibilities that we have to do during these days. There's things that we have to do in order to worship our Father during these days. And these are serious events. And that's why I'm, doing this class, spending so much time on it is, because I don't want anybody, out there confused. If you watch those other channels, and they leave you confused, it's not my fault. You come over here to Coaching the Fight because we're going to show you the scripture to, what all of this means. Not all of those guys who are teaching you, not all of those ministers are actually teaching you from the Bible. A lot of those guys, they don't even really believe in the Bible. They tell you that, the laws of Moses went away this and the laws of Moses went away that. That's the Bible. So if they don't believe in Moses, then they might as well rip out the first 5 books of the Bible and destroy them away, because, they don't believe in that. And then they might as well rip out a lot of the red letters in the book of the Gospels too, because the Messiah told us we were supposed to obey what Moses said, especially you read about in Matthew chapter 5, I think it is, when he's talking about the laws of Moses shall never go away. Even after the whole planet goes away, those laws will still be in effect. But, if sacred days, if feast days, those days listed in Leviticus 23, if all they mean to you is watch days, rapture watch days, you're going to be sitting, waiting to go away from here or whatever. If that's all it means to you, then, you can do whatever you want to do for the calendar. But, for the rest of us who are actually trying to be obedient to the scripture, we need to make sure that we celebrate the days on the correct day. And so the next significant holiday is an exilic day, but the next holy days coming up are Hanukkah of 2020. And those days promises to be important. And, as we get closer to those days, we're going to be talking about those days more and more, because I personally believe that some spiritual events will take place, maybe even some, physics, some stuff we can actually see could take place during that time. But I believe, either way, there's going to be some important times. So look forward to that. Hit the subscribe button. If you just interested in Rapture Watch Days, hit the subscribe button. But if you're interested in what it is that we're supposed to be doing on those days, and being obedient to the scripture, go ahead and hit that bell notification button as well, guys. YouTube, they don't promote channels like these over here, and so if you're just subscribed without hitting that bell notification button, you may miss those classes. Click on our channel, you'll see all of the classes that you didn't miss. We during these off season, like I call it, we're in the off season now. We teach what it is that we are supposed to be doing in preparation for these days to come up. The focus of our channel is survival of the tribulation. We're not really into that consolation prize of being raptured away off into the spirit world. That don't take much. All that take is believing that Jesus died and God raised him from the dead, and you can go away in the rapture. You'll be saved to go away in the rapture. But we understand over here the promises of the Bible is inheritance of the earth. We have a class coming up on that too, where we're going to talk about what it takes to actually inherit the earth. This is that 1,000-year reign after the apocalypse is over and the earth is going back to normal. There will be people who are alive now who will survive through the apocalypse, and they will go on to be the Noahs of the new world. They will be the ones who will be tasked with repopulating the earth, just like Noah did. After the flood, there were 8 people that survived the flood, and that's why everybody on this planet can point back to Noah as their granddaddy or whatever. Well, after this apocalypse that that's pretty much imminent at this point, that from my calculation, there's going to be about 2 million people that's going to survive to be over there. 2 million people. A lot of people are going to go away in that physical rapture. They're going to go into the spirit world, and doing that, there'll be some people that'll survive, but they'll end up, a lot of people will end up perishing in the apocalypse. All of the wicked people are going away. All of the, I think it's Revelation chapter 20 or somewhere, it talks about all of, the unbelievers, the doubtful, the people that, like lies or whatever. I can't remember all of them, but they're all going away. And then after the apocalypse is over, you'll have what I believe is about 2 million people that'll be alive, and they'll go on to repopulate the earth. That's about 1 in 3,800 people, about 1 in 3,800 people. And where I calculated in this small county where I live, that's only about 5 or 6 people. So, and, I'm looking at it like, I got 6 people in my household, 6 people in my household. So we could very well be the only people in our entire county that's alive after the apocalypse. And then we'll go on to, repopulate the earth. And, that's kind of why I'm, putting these videos out, is because, my children don't have wives. They're going to need somebody to, they're going to need some of you guys' children in order to, create these families in order to repopulate the earth. Or we're going to have some old Lot kind of mess going on, and that ain't happening. But anyway, just running my mouth. Let's look over here at this website called softschools.com right quick. I told you guys that I was going to give you the next legitimate watch date. And we can find out about this over here in when we're talking about Constantine. That's right, Constantine. He is the person who is known as the head of the Catholic Church. This website talks about a lot of the things that he did in his life, from probably when he was born, and he was a emperor or some kind of stuff he did. He killed a lot of the disciples off, and the thing about it, you can see what he did up here in the year 312 AD. This was the beginning of what we know as the Catholic Church. You can read this here if you want to. Blow it up, maybe you can actually read it, push the pause button or back it up. But I'll just tell you, in 312 AD, Constantine, who had been in charge of killing the disciples of Christ up until that point, he would go in, rape and pillage the communities. Anybody who was keeping the commandments, anybody that was obeying the feast days, he would just run through and he would try to annihilate the communities. But the thing about it, the more he targeted those people of faith, the more they read in their scripture, the more they put faith in God, and the more they thrived. So it was like the more he tried to kill them, the stronger they got. And so in 312, he came up with an idea. In 312, he, along with some priests who were servants of the Most High, kind of like Balaam kind of individuals who turned on the children of God and went over and started working for the beasts. They went over and started working for Constantine, told Constantine how to trick the children of God, told him that if he were to put the name of God on his shield and on his horses and go in and claim that he was a Christian, that those people would believe him. So he did, and it worked. He went in and he put the name of God on, all of his equipment. And when those believers, those disciples of Christ, saw that name on his shield, they thought that he was a representative of the Most High. And then he quickly went on to make it a rule that you could not kill the disciples anymore. So after that, a lot of people put their faith in him. And he went on to have the Council of Nicaea, the Council of Trent, where, he canonized the Bible, created what we know now as the Catholic Church, the head or the beginning of the Protestant Church. Well, this all happened in 312. Thing about it, you see that date right there? It happened on October the 28th of 312. So, let me show you something else. Now, I'm not a prophet, I don't believe I know how to make predictions or anything like that. So, I'm not telling you that anything significant will happen on these days. But what I do is I go in and I see a date like that one where Constantine did this thing over here, and I kind of go in and see what the scripture has to say about that. Well, let me show you something really interesting when it comes to a prophecy that was given to Daniel in relationship to that Constantine figure you see over there. We're here in Daniel chapter 12 and verse 7. And this is the man clothed in linen that's talking to Daniel, and he's answering a question for Daniel. Daniel had asked him, how long is, till, all of these events take place. Let me read verse 7. It says, and I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and swear by him that liveth forever, that it shall be for a times and half, when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, and all these things shall be finished. So, now, what he's talking about is the Catholic Church. You see that part about it says, he accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people. Well, that's what Constantine started when, this event in 312, when he became the head of the Catholic Church. One of the things he made them do was to stop keeping the holy feast days and to even stop obeying the commandments. He changed the laws. He changed the times, just like you read about over there in Daniel, basically causing the people to scatter. This is why we have been scattered ever since. It's because nobody is obeying the statutes of the Bible. Well, look at how he's telling him that this will go on for a time, and half a time. And so so the question becomes, how long is this time period to where this scattering would actually go on? Now, to understand how long a time is, we have to go back to Daniel chapter 9. We always want to let the scripture define the scripture. So when we come back and we look in Daniel chapter 9, we see that a time is actually 70 weeks. Now, this is really interesting. 70 weeks is actually 490 years. It's interesting because when you look at the events surrounding the temple all the way throughout history, even all the way back to Adam, you can section off all of the years of humanity here on the earth down into these 490 year cycles. I'm not going to go into detail much on this because I've covered this in a lot of classes, but just to tell you real quickly, the first 490 years started with the fallen angels. Well, let me take that back. The first 490 years started with Abel. And then if you go from the birth of Abel, 490 years, you end up at the fallen angels. Those angels that came down and mated with women and created Nephilim. Well, if you go another 490 years from that, you end up at the flood of Noah, or the birth of Noah, the flood of Noah time frame. You skip ahead another 490 years, you end up in the time of Abraham. You skip another 490 years, you're going to end up in the Exodus, around about the Exodus of Egypt. Go another 490 years, you're going to be in Solomon's time when he built the temple. Go 490 years beyond that, you're going to end up at the destruction of the temple, and those 70 years when they were put in captivity. You go another 490 years after that, you're going to end up right around the birth of Christ or the crucifixion of Christ. It's really interesting, these times that you can see throughout history. The thing about it, a time is 490 years. So watch what happens when we come in using the time as 490 years, starting in the year 312, when Daniel said that the scattering period would take place. So I pull out a little calculator here, and we go starting in AD 312, and which was the beginning of the scattering period. Like I said, the beginning of the church age, as they call it, the age of I want to say the age of grace, but that makes it sound like a good thing, this church age. But it was actually the age when man pretty much corrupted the teachings of Christ and Moses and everybody else that came before him, and disrupted the worship of just about everybody on the planet that claims to have faith. You know, we're all kind of under the Pope's doctrine. Even to this day, the Pope is the greatest, most powerful religious leader on the planet, even to the point where he's trying to unify all of the other religions here today. But anyway, you look at 312 when it started, and then you add looking at 490 years as a time, and then you say, okay, he was told in Daniel chapter 12 that he would do this for a time, times and half a time, or 3.5 times. Look at what you end up. You end up in the year 2027, which, you know, you could do your research. A lot of people have that as being the end of the tribulation or the end of the apocalypse or something like that. They have it going from the year 2020 through the year 2027. And that's why I wanted to show you guys this as a potential watch date, because, you know, if the tribulation lasts for 7 years and it ends on 3.5 times after the 312, then the beginning of the 312 could actually be a significant day. So when is the beginning of this 7-year period that ends in the year 2027? So let's come over here and let's see, look again, and because this website gives us the exact date. You see, it says October the 28th, 312. So will this event begin on October the 28th, 312? Well, the problem with this is that this is a Gregorian calendar date. So our Father in heaven doesn't go by Gregorian calendars. You know, he has his own sacred calendar according to what we read about over there in Genesis chapter 1 and what we read about in Enoch. And he never expected his calendar to change. He doesn't change by the whims of man. And because man changes his calendar doesn't mean the Father changes his calendar. So we need to understand when this date corresponds to in the year 2020. It was October the 28th in 312. But what is that date in the year 2020? And for that, again, we're going to have to consult the Enoch calendar. But to make it easy on us, we're going to jump over and we're going to look at timeanddate.com. You know, people, as an aside note, people always, you know, when I start talking about lunar calendars and correcting the date according to the lunar calendar, the first thing people think about is their birthday. You know, they only really consider the date of their birth according to the Gregorian calendar. But as we talked about, you know, our Father in heaven, he don't go by, you know, Gregorian calendars. You know, so if we really want to know when the angels celebrate our birth date, when the Father considers our birth date, we have to correct the date of our birth according to the lunar calendar. So let me show you how you can do that using this date right here. So, and we know the date is October of 312. So just think about that as being the date of your birth or whatever. You know, you do it the exact same way. The first thing you need to do is you need to find out what day it was that you were born according to the lunar calendar. So what we're doing here, we're going to find out what date October the 28th was according to the lunar calendar. So using this website, we're simply going to put in October of 312, and then we're going to go in and we're going to look at the calendar for October of 312, and then we're going to go to the month. We're going to go to the day of the 28th of October. We see that it is Heshvan 11. So as far as, you know, as far as the heavenly tablets are concerned, and I don't know that this is written on the heavenly tablets, but as far as the sacred calendar is concerned, Constantine started the Catholic Church on Heshvan of the year 312, Heshvan 11. So now we just have to find out when is Heshvan 11 in the year 2020. And for that, we think it's about October, so we'll just put in the date 2020 and find Heshvan 11. All right, so we're in October of 2020, and we're looking for Heshvan 11, and we see that it is on or about October the 29th. That's not that big of a deal. That's really so close that, really don't, and you got to give or take a day. So that's actually within the margin of error for it to fall, on the 29th opposed to the 28th. But now I really wanted to do this also for the year 2027, just in case, somehow YouTube is still up and people are watching this video in the year 2027. Let's see when Heshvan 11 is in the year 2027. You can see that Tishri 30 goes out to the 31st of October. So Heshvan 11 is not even in the month October at all. So let's look in November. And we can see that Heshvan 11 falls on or about November the 11th, 2020. So for those individuals out there who, are creating their calendars, understanding, 2027 as being a significant year as far as the end of the apocalypse or the end of the tribulation, well, they can look at the 11th month, the 11th day of the month, as the time in which Babylon should fall. That should be the fall of Babylon, right? Because we are talking about the time, and half a time of the church age. So the church age ends on or about November the 11th of the year 2027. But, for me, I'm gonna include that in the description or maybe even the title of this video. November the 11th, 2027. But it's kind of hard for me to even think that the internet would still be going on by the end. So let's come back over and let's look at 2020 as possibly the beginning of this period of time that we know as the apocalypse. And yep, we're looking at October the 28th to October the 29th. Thing is, that is so close to October the 31st, Halloween of the year 2020. It's within a few days of Halloween of 2020. And, I may end up doing another video on Halloween. I kind of wanted to touch on all of the potential dates, and that is definitely a potential date as far as man's activity is concerned, not necessarily, the Father's activity or spiritual events, because, I'm one of the ones who believes that, stuff usually go down on Sabbath days or holy days or new moon days and stuff like that. So as far as October the 21st on the sacred calendar, that's just a random day. But as far as the wickedness, the wicked calendar, the pagan calendar, that's the most significant day of the year. As far as the pagan calendar is concerned, the most devilish day of the year is Halloween. And for this Constantine days, I'm gonna call it, falling, within 48 hours of, this day starting is quite significant. That could, it could add to, what's going on there. But just to touch on Halloween, guys, I do realize there's, at least two different main groups that are watching this channel. One who is watching it just to hear about these watch days. And then there's the other guys who are trying to be obedient to the scripture. Don't do Halloween. Halloween is not something that we are supposed to be participating in. If you into getting scared and into, wickedness and all of that, spend a day studying the origins of Halloween. See where that day came from, and that should be enough. You got to go out and put on no costumes and go to no haunted houses. Just look at how wicked that day is just in itself, and then avoid participating in that day, because that falls under the first commandment, which says that you will have no other gods before me. Those are pagan gods that they are worshiping on those days. When you go in and you look up the pagan calendar, you'll see that there are actually 8 days that are 8 days considered holidays around the calendar. And like we said, Halloween is one of the bad ones. It's actually the day that they talk about how the spirit world is so close. They call it the Day of the Dead or something like that. They worship the thing about it, guys. This is one day of the year when you have almost the entire world celebrating evil. Now, you can imagine the good would come in this world if everybody decided to all pray at the same time. If we all picked a day, everybody in the world, or 90% of the world, decided that they was going to pray on a certain day, how much good that would do for humanity. Well, imagine the opposite going on Halloween, where you have a celebration of evil. Even if, it's just putting on a Halloween costume and, walking around with jack-o'-lanterns collecting candy. That's part of the ritual. You're actually participating in that. So, we need to avoid that. Like I said, if you don't understand what I'm saying, just go to Google, go to YouTube, and put in origins of Halloween or truth of Halloween. And, if you haven't done this already, you are in for quite a surprise on just how much wickedness actually goes on that day. But, it's part of that pagan cycle. You see here, the cycle I'm showing you is, you see at the top of the list is Christmas. I'm not going to pronounce the name of these words here because they're actually gods that they're celebrating. That Y word, that's actually a god. And you hear this term, all around Christmas, you're talking about these logs or whatever. That's actually the god they're celebrating when it comes to Christmas. And then that next one going to the right over there, that's actually Valentine's Day. And then you have Easter right there. And they call that one May Day, but that's another god. That V word is a god that they worship. That L word, that's a god that they worship. And you keep going around, and you have you have that god there that they celebrate on Halloween. That's who they will be celebrating on Halloween during their rituals. And the thing about Halloween, it is a harvest festival. They celebrate in the way they do to try to get a good harvest. Well, that is actually what we do during tabernacles, guys. Tabernacles is a holy harvest festival. That's what it's all about, is celebrating the harvest season and ensuring that we will have a good harvest season going forth. It just so happens that the pagans do it a different way on a different day. They do it on November the 1st or October the 31st. But I just think it's, quite interesting, even a little bit sad, that you have a lot of the religious ministers of today who will call themselves Christians and will get on YouTube and TBN and everywhere else and try to teach you about holiness and righteousness. And they will denounce the holy day of tabernacles and tell you that you're not supposed to sleep in a booth, and you're not supposed to do this on tabernacles, and you're not supposed to keep that day because Jesus did away with it. They will marginalize or try to erase the holy days of tabernacles, and then they'll come right or back around, and then they'll celebrate Halloween. Some of these guys are going to be on your screen dressed up in costumes, walking around with their kids on Halloween, celebrating the pagan days. They're rejecting the holy days and are promoting the celebration of these pagan days. Well, that's what Constantine did. That's exactly what Constantine did. He erased all of the holidays and came back and replaced them with pagan days. So you don't hear about Christmas. I mean, you don't hear about Hanukkah. You hear about Christmas. You don't hear about Passover. You hear about Easter. He actually replaced these. You don't hear about Pentecost, because it too has been replaced by these other pagan holidays. I'm not which one exactly it is, but one of those days right there is to stamp out the efforts of those who would otherwise keep the holy mandatory feast day of Pentecost. They're rejecting the holy day and are celebrating the pagan days. That's why those guys are caught up in what many of us recognize as the strong delusion. You read about that over in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, where you hear about this strong delusion. What is it? Verse 12 says, it says, they that are taking pleasure in unrighteousness. So they are rejecting the statutes that we read about in Leviticus 23. They are rejecting the judgments that we read about in Exodus chapter 22 and 21. And they are rejecting the commandments that we read about in Exodus chapter 20. I should have said the statutes were in Exodus chapter 23, because that, rounds off the whole book of the covenant. Exodus chapter 20 through chapter 23 is the book of the covenant. But they are rejecting the covenant, even teaching against the covenant. And they're taking pleasure in unrighteousness. Exodus chapter 20 through 23 is what it means to be righteous, means to keep the covenant. But they are rejecting that and taking pleasure in unrighteousness. Well, you see in verse 11, it says, God shall send them strong delusion that they shall believe a lie. And, much of this strong delusion is, what they believe is going to take place during the end times, believing that, well, you know what they believe. It's one thing to be ignorant of scriptural truths, but it's another thing to be out there teaching them, teaching ignorance. But, let me just leave you with this verse here coming from the Gospel of Thomas. You can hear this gospel, and I would advise you to take a listen to it or read it. You type in Gospel of Thomas .pdf on Google, or Gospel of Thomas on YouTube. You can hear the audiobook. But let me just read you this book, this verse right here, 102. It says, Jesus said, "Damn the Pharisees. They are like dogs sleeping in the manger. The dogs neither eats nor lets the cattle eat." What that's talking about is how these individuals are in rejection of the kingdom of heaven, and they don't want anybody else to go into the kingdom of heaven either. We see that over here. You can see a diagram over here created by Clarence Larkin in his book Dispensational Truth, which a lot of those guys, they'll teach this information. They find it to be true. They believe in it. Well, we'll use their own documents to show what it is that they're doing. You see right there how it talks about the millennial age or the kingdom age. And you see down there where it says Israel is the head of the nations. Now, like we talk about, Israel is a spiritual name, talking about anybody who believes in the Father, who, obeys his word and is waiting for his arrival. That's who Israel is. It has really nothing to do with blood ties, understanding, all of the, we were just talking about it today, how King David and King Solomon had 1,000 different women in his life, 400 wives and 600 concubines, and he had children by many of those. A lot of them women would have been Gentile women, which means that his seed, his royal seed, would have been passed down to Gentiles. And, so there's no way to tell, according to the way we look, who has the royal seed. Some of them women would have, been of many different races. And so when you look at the races of today, there's no way to tell, who Israel is. There is a way to tell who Judah is. We'll talk about that in another class. But anyway, you see that it is Israel that's going to be the head of the nations during the millennial reign. But like we said, those ministers, they're like the dogs. They sleep in the barn with the cows. The cows got hay in there, the cows got corn in there, and the dogs don't want none of it. They don't want no hay. They don't want no corn. But then when the cattle try to go eat of it, they sitting there barking at them. They won't let them eat it either. Well, that's what you're seeing here. Those ministers don't want nothing to do with the kingdom of heaven. They actually want to go up. Over here you see how it's talking about how they're going up, and they're going away. They call this the physical rapture or whatever. They call it the harpazo, where they're actually going away and going into the spirit world. Well, while they're going into the spirit world, you see that it is actually Israel. They name call it the Jews here. The Jews are the ones who go through, like over here you see the recombining of Israel that's actually taking place. And if you follow that line down there, they're the ones who go off into the millennial age and become the head of the nations, while those other guys, they're stressing going away and going up, to what is it says, to meet with Jesus in the sky or whatever. That's what they're teaching, that to go away, and they're not letting everybody know that there is another option to go, to meet Jesus over here, as he is the king of the planet. There's the king over there reigning with those who are still alive. They are teaching that the only real option is to die and go into the spirit world or whatever and meet the king that way. We're all going to meet the king eventually, but they should, stop trying and to take away from those who plan to live through the tribulation. Like we said, after all of the wickedness has been removed, including those people who are caught up in that strong delusion or removed from the earth, there will be those who remain alive, and that will be Israel. They will be the head of the nations. They will reign with Christ for 1,000 years down here on the earth. Well, I guess I'll go ahead and end it there. If you got something out of this video, go ahead and hit the like button. If you didn't get anything out of this video, or if you disagree with what we're saying, go ahead and hit the dislike button. But leave us a comment either way, and shalom.